April 30th, and we are here with our friends from Boston Public School Department to review Boston Public Schools elementary and secondary education as pertaining to dockets 0622 through 0625, orders for the FY20 operating budget, including annual appropriations for departmental operations, annual appropriation for the school department, appropriation for other post-employment benefits, and appropriation for certain transportation and public realm improvements, as well as dockets 0626 through 0628, capital budget appropriations, including loan orders and lease purchase agreements. I'd like to remind folks this is a public hearing, both being recorded and broadcast on Comcast Channel 8, Comcast 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964, and streamed at boston.gov/city-council-TV. I'd like to ask folks in the chamber to silence their electronic devices. At the conclusion of the presentation and questions and answers from my colleagues, we will take public testimony. There is a sign-in sheet to my left by the door. I ask that you sign in, state name, affiliation, residence, and please check the box yes if you do wish to testify. There are approximately 34 hearings throughout this budget season. We encourage the general public to provide testimony in several ways. You can come to a hearing and provide public testimony in person. You can come to the hearing dedicated to public testimony on Tuesday, June 4th, anytime from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. And if we do not conclude that public testimony in that time frame, we will stay as long as it takes to hear everybody's views on the budget. You can also send your testimony to the Committee on Ways and Means, City Council, 5th floor, Boston, City Hall, Boston, Mass. 02201, or email the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov. I'd like to also introduce my colleagues in order of their arrival. To my far left, both councilors Tim McCarthy and Matt O'Malley are here present at this point. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Mary. Thanks, Mary.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Mary Driscoll. I'm the Associate Superintendent for Elementary and Middle Schools, and I'm joined this morning by Tommy Welsh and Joel Boyd, who are academic superintendents, two of the academic superintendents that support our high schools, also by Marcia Innes, and by Michelle Severia from our offices of high school support. Marcia is working on post-secondary initiatives, and Michelle is our expert in CTE. And then we're also joined by David Bloom, who needs no introduction at this point, I would say.
And we've been joined by Councilor Frank Baker as well.
Doesn't. So our agenda for this morning, if we can get the slides to advance, hopefully if you have a copy of the deck, if not, is to take you through, we're focusing on the idea of how we're supporting our elementary and secondary schools. Some of the material is going to be duplicative of things we've already talked about in other hearings. I know David gave a full report on how we develop budgets for all of our schools through weighted student funding. In the central office hearing, I shared kind of our network support structure and the way that we're delivering differentiated support to our schools. So some of this will be a little bit repetitive, and then we will be digging into college and career readiness and into our CTE initiatives, which is new content. So we put this quote at the beginning to stress this idea of reciprocal accountability. We know that we have some schools that need to be delivering better results for students and for families. We also know we cannot hold schools accountable to do better without offering them more support. So the basic idea is reciprocal accountability. For every additional degree of performance we're asking for our schools, we need to provide them with additional support that is going to be able to help them impact that performance. To do this, we've built this network structure, which I've talked with you about before. The idea is that each school is surrounded by a team of liaisons who bring expertise in both academic and operational work. The schools that are in greatest need of support have the full teams of liaisons devoted just to that small network of schools. Schools that are higher achieving have access to liaisons, but not at the same level as our high need schools. I've also talked with you already about the idea that this structure is built on national research that's been done about the ways to create rapid improvement, and one of the key levers is principal supervisors. So we've shifted our model to more closely resemble the recommended best practices at the national level, with small network sizes, regular coaching in cycles of improvement, professional developments for the principals in that team, along with the liaisons who are serving that team. And as part of the investments in this new budget, we will be adding additional academic superintendents to limit the span of control so that more schools will be able to get this intensive coaching support. So this just shows our current structure, where the network size varies from as small as 6 to as large as 26. And moving forward for next year, we will make investments that will allow us to reduce that span of control so that the largest network is no larger than 17 schools. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tommy Welsh to take you sort of in detail into one of our networks.
Good morning, counselors. As Mary mentioned, my name is Tommy Welch, Academic Superintendent this year for the Alternative Network of Schools and Programs. This is an example of that customized support that she was just mentioning, that's based on theory and a lot of research over the years. The alternative network in Boston Public Schools is not new by any means, but this is the first year that we've actually taken it to this level of organization. You see all these big bubbles. We call this the constellation of our alternative and adult schools, alternative education schools and programs. Some of them are larger bubbles, some of them are smaller bubbles, some of them we view as independent schools, and some of them are kind of like a collaborative collection of programs that are very small and customized based on student need. This was in response to several of the reports that came out in the last year or so. Probably the most popular or well-known is the Off-Track Youth Report, which had some very pointed recommendations for our school system and how we support our students who may be off track or in jeopardy of dropping out. And so if you look at this, you'll see that it's the first time we have a network especially dedicated for our alternative schools. So they're all sitting at the same table. I'm leading this work with other key leaders in the system. Before they were maybe independent or part of other networks, but they're all at the same table. And what we're really trying to do this year is take a multi-year approach to how we're going to solve some of the challenges and issues that are facing our students in alternative education, not only now, but looking out into the future, 2, 3, 4 years. What are the numbers telling us? What are we looking at for enrollment? What are the needs of our students, and how do we design programs that meet the specific needs of both our students and our system? These schools, I mean, they're smaller in nature. They are a little bit more expensive, but it's aligned with the strategy that we have for providing every student what they need to get to take them to where they want to go. So, I mean, I'd be happy to answer questions a little bit later on about specifically about alt ed, but with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the team.
You might have to point it at it.
All right, if I can bring you back to the handout as we, oh, there we go. All right, so as you heard my colleague point out, some of the stuff you've heard about previously, some of this stuff is evolving, and some of it has been strategically refined under the leadership of Superintendent Perrell. What you see here in front of you are two of the strategic priorities that Superintendent Perot laid out in order to improve teaching and learning across the system of schools in Boston. And I'm going to bring your attention to that second area of differentiating school supports. So you heard the example there of our alternative schools working across all schools in Boston. If you can advance the slide. We work to differentiate supports by tailoring our systemic structures to the individual needs of schools through a process of quality school planning. What you see on the right side of that slide is an example of just one page of those plans that all of our school leaders work with their individual school communities to build, that are worked then in alignment with the strategic priorities and the outcome metrics that we track at the district level. So those plans then lead to a system of differentiated and targeted school supports that's coordinated by the academic superintendents of each network. Here are an example of some of those supports that are, again, tailored to the individual needs of our schools with a higher level of intensity for schools with the greatest needs. Those include observations, classroom observations, and feedback for teachers in our schools, working alongside our headmasters and principals, network-based professional learning communities, which brings principals together, principals who have similar needs, similar challenges, bringing them together to learn from one another so that they can coordinate the work at the network level. And then targeted deployment of those central liaisons that you heard Mary speak about previously.
There are a couple of specific investments in the budget, some of which I've already talked about in previous hearings. One of which is the idea of additional academic superintendents to provide this job-embedded executive coaching that our school leaders have told us they find incredibly valuable. Another is the partnerships with higher ed institutions like the University of Virginia and Boston College, both of which are doing work to support the development of our leaders and a pipeline from the classroom to leadership and then to central office leadership. And then finally, a partnership with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, where we're supporting 10 schools to develop transformation plans that will lead to rapid improvement and an accountability rating that keeps them out of DESE's control.
Good morning, counselors. Again, my name is Marcia Ennis-Mitchell, and I oversee a lot of the post-secondary initiatives for the Boston Public Schools. As you can definitely imagine, the college application process can be a very complicated one, and even more so for a student who is first in their families to attend. Some of our students are attending colleges where they are undermatched, and what that means is they have a higher grade point average and or SAT scores, and they're not attending the most competitive option based on their criteria. Others successfully begin college, and then they do not persist, nor do they complete. And not completing their credential and having taken out financial aid can have a very negative impact and outcome on their family, and can only add to the student loan debt crisis that we see in our country right now. So what we want to do in the Boston Public Schools is to really provide access to tools as well as an advising structure that will allow our students to build a roadmap for their college and career beginning in the 9th grade. So this year, Boston Public Schools will be officially launching the Naviance College and Career Planning Platform in September of 2019. For the past year or so, we have been rolling out the tool and phasing it out, making sure that it's in alignment and is synced with our student information management system, making sure that all of our students have access to their accounts, as well as teachers and other practitioners have account access as well. The platform is an amazing tool, but it doesn't stand alone. It definitely needs to be aligned with a structured curriculum, which we're continuing to work on, as well as workshops and lesson plans. It will help students to document their achievements and set goals. House artifacts. So if you're going through an academic experience and you have documents that really highlight how well you are in a particular subject area, you can actually upload that document to your Naviance account. It helps them to engage in a series of college planning activities. So for example, during the 9th grade year, one activity could be a career interest profiler, where a student can take that, help them to understand how their aspirations connect to possible career, new and emerging opportunities that currently don't necessarily exist. It also will help them to go through the exploratory process and select their pathway programs at Madison Park and other schools offering career and technical education opportunities. So we're super excited about that. During the 10th grade, an activity could be to engage them in a Strengths Explorer, where they can understand their learning style and really work strategically in partnership with their teachers to set some academic goals so they can access some more rigorous course opportunities. The platform will help students to manage and build their resumes over a 4-year period, engage in scholarship searches, complete college searches that are aligned to their GPAs, SAT scores, and other criteria. And during their senior year, they can actually match their Naviance accounts to what's called the Common Application. And this is an application that students use to apply to multiple colleges. And it will allow for the ecosystem of supports to really help them through that journey in completing their letters of recommendations, getting their transcripts submitted, and other supplemental documentation. So teachers, college access partners, parents, and their school counselors will all be able to work in concert with these students in making the right fit post-secondary plan for themselves. This is a huge game changer for Boston Public Schools in the ways in which we engage students in their planning process and selecting the right fit college. There have been a number of our students in schools, particularly at our exam schools and some pilot schools, that have had access to Naviance for a number of years, and we're super excited to finally offer to all of our schools and all of our students. Our families are very, very capable of managing this process if we invest in them and we give them the tools so they could be successful. So I'm excited to be part of the internal steering committee for Naviance, and very appreciative that we're finally funding something important to the college planning process.
Thank you.
Good morning. We wanted to share with you today our goals for college and career readiness for career and technical education students. This includes improving the quality of our current CVTE and CTE programs. There are components that we're adding in all of our career and tech ed programs related to college and career planning, work-based learning, as well as post-secondary linkages. We also are creating a continuum of work-based learning experiences. This includes industry tours, job shadows, internships, and other career experiences. We continue to increase the number of students who graduate with industry-related credentials. We're happy to report that with the class of 2017, we had a 92.5 percent credentialing rate for our CTE students. And of course, our goal is to have 100% students credentialed by the time they exit our CTE programs. We're also increasing the number of career and technical education offerings in the district. That includes traditional CTE pathways as well as other college and career pathways. Although the print is very tiny, what we wanted to show you here is a listing of our new programs that will be launched in school year 1920. So those include a new program in programming and web development at Madison Park. We also had an environmental science and technology program that launched this year at Boston Green Academy, a fashion technology program at Boston Arts Academy, We have had some new programming in our non-Chapter 74 offerings, including what we're calling wall-to-wall pathways at East Boston High School, an engineering program at the O'Brien, and we're also opening a new biotechnology program at New Mission High School. Altogether, these programs, including the Madison Park program, probably will offer an additional 500 seats when they are fully enrolled. And of course, we launch programs with the underclassmen and then each year roll up so that we're not at that number of students at this time, but in the next couple of years, we will have more students in career and technical education pathways in the district. And lastly, we have a slide where we're sharing our budget from FY19. Traditionally, we have shown you our current budget because we only have an estimate of our Perkins grant at this time. We've been lucky, and our budget has been very similar from year to year the past couple of years. That includes our out-of-district student tuition, our Perkins grant allocation, which has been fairly consistent over the last couple of years, and we also have a small budget for CTE, instructional materials and supplies, that our Perkins grant cannot, that we cannot put on the grant. So for FY19, we had a budget of approximately $2.6 million for CTE.
One school of particular interest to the counselors has been Madison Park. We know there have been a number of hearings with the Education Committee about the situation at Madison Park. Just wanted to bring up one update on the Madison Park budget and also use that as a way to highlight a new method we have of determining the sort of full dollar per pupil that the district spends on school budgets. People often ask, what does the central office budget go for? Why do you spend so much in central office? Well, we have sort of two main types of central office spending as shown through the Madison Park budget here. We have things called centrally funded school supports, and these are things that you would see day to day in schools, but they sit on the central office budget. For example, all of our custodians are on the central office budget, but you see them in schools. All of our transportation, all of the benefits for teachers and paraprofessionals, as well as a lot of related services and other supports for students with disabilities. And the list does go on. We could go into that further. There is also then, of course, central administration costs. Those costs are small relative to the other expenditures on our budget, but we can express those out as a per pupil and a total by school. All of this information is available for all schools on the Boston Public Schools budget website. As we look forward just in general to next year, I wanted to highlight from our earlier presentation the increased investment in schools for next year. This is the school's budget. And then we just want to also highlight, because we are focused on elementary and secondary schools today, those central office departments that are of particular focus to elementary and secondary schools supports, as opposed to a more district-wide focus, where the supports are targeted through the core of the network structure that Mary referenced earlier, and Tommy and Joel as well. And there's a little footnote at the bottom that explains which departments go into each of the categories that you'll see there. But throughout all of these, what you will see is a continued investment in our schools by BPS.
And with that, we're ready for your questions.
Thank you. And shortly after you began your presentation, we were joined by Councilor Andrea Campbell, Councilor Josh Sakam, Councilor Nisa Sabi-George, and Councilor Michelle Wu. Let me recognize Councilor Tim McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just a couple quick questions. I'm really thankful to see the additions of programs at Madison Park. We've been here for a week now talking with BPS, and clearly over the last couple years under this leadership, you guys have made great progress in what's going on at Madison Park. And I know that it's not the time to talk about the building spaces and things here, but certainly you guys are absolutely moving in the right direction regarding that. And I love to see the green technology as well as arts and science at Boston Arts Academy. As far as the communication, so this layout for elementary and secondary school support, I think if you could just dive a little bit deeper on how we're getting this message to the parents. Because with the Build BPS and all of the questions that are arising, people are still concerned, what's happening to my daughter or my son's grammar school? Are we going K to 6? Are we, combining with schools? Can you just dig a little bit deeper into how we're getting that message out and when the final plans would be announced?
If you're asking specifically about the Build BPS initiative, we've been doing one series of community meetings that's sort of generalized by neighborhood. And at those meetings, we, whenever possible, will have the academic superintendents and operational superintendents in the room so that parents can see those faces and know that they are go-to people, not just for the Build BPS work, but for any issue that might arise in their child's school. They can reach out. If they're not able to get a response from the school leader, they can reach out to either the academic superintendent or the operational superintendent. So we try to take every opportunity to make those face-to-face connections. In terms of the specific Build BPS work, as we move through the plans for our middle school transformations, because those are sort of the hubs of how we're going to be reimagining the schools in the district and shifting configurations. As we work around a particular middle school, we're doing more intensive work with the schools in that area. So, for example, we announced in October that we were going to be transforming the McCormick from a standalone middle school to a 7 through 12. And since then, we've been doing a lot of engagement work with the schools, both the McCormick and potential high school partners, but also with all of the 6 K to 5 schools that feed the McCormick, as well as the Perry, which is a K to 8, but in that ecosystem, in that it's in the same geographic area. Once we sort of conclude and determine a high school partner for the McCormick, we'll then begin to just identify another middle school transformation, and we'll work with the K to 5s in that area to communicate with them. We've also recently begun some conversation with the Grove Hall Alliance, which are a group of schools that have been doing their own planning work. And so we've begun to talk with them about their vision for potentially creating feeder patterns from the Early Learning Center that's part of the Alliance directly into some of the member schools, which is not something that is currently part of our assignment plan, but something that we very much want to explore and see if that's a possibility.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for all you do. So the most up-to-date student enrollment number, I assume from your what you furnished us, is 54,997 pupils, give or take?
Yeah, give or take. I'm gonna say most up to date, but, because every day it's slightly different.
Yeah, totally understood. But what was it last year? What was sort of the average number?
I have to pull that up.
It was more. It was 56
more, yeah.
or 57,000. Yeah.
We're down
1,200.
about 1,200 students from last year.
What are we? Have we looked at the? And I'll get into some specific questions, but I guess this is. The city's growing in population, and yet our student enrollment it was staying steady, and now it's decreasing.
So I'll have to get back to you with more details, but we get, there are two main things we are looking at. One is we get a sort of consolidated report from the state about enrollment across sectors.
Yeah.
We don't yet have that for this year from what we submitted back in October. So once we get that, we should know more information about, are more kids going to parochial school, private school, charter schools? Well, we know what's going on with charter schools, but
Yeah.
The other thing, though, we know is that there are some demographics in the city that are working against us, that we have families having fewer children, more people sort of aging in place at home. And as a result, we are seeing sort of a shift in demographics that is affecting this as well.
No, understood. And again, I don't want to sort of belabor the point. I guess we're not seeing growth. You can explain it away, and you are not incorrect when you talk about other options, families, when you talk about couples having fewer children, when you talk about, couples waiting longer to have children. But the fact of the matter is that we have seen tremendous growth in the city, and we are not seeing that reflected. And I think some of it has to do with the fact that many families don't have a high degree of confidence in Boston Public Schools, and that's something I know we all work to try to push back against. So I guess it's just more curious. If you talk about PowerPoint presentation, page 9, there are 2 new academic superintendents that will be added in this budget.
Yes, that's a proposal, one to support elementary schools and one to support high schools.
Okay, and so that will then decrease the school per unit sort of portfolio for the academic superintendents?
Yes, and in the elementary, the way we configured the networks this year, we have 4 that are very small, 6 to 9,
Yeah.
and then 2 that are currently very large. There's 27 or 28 schools, so it'll be those networks that we pull apart to bring down to a smaller size, because those school leaders report they really value the side-by-side coaching they get from the academic superintendent. It just can't happen more than once every 6 weeks with that many schools.
In those, I would assume the smaller portfolio for an academic superintendent would be higher need schools, schools that are, I know we don't say level 3 or 4 anymore, but whatever the 3rd and 4th equivalent are on those level. Okay, and then PowerPoint presentation, page 24, you talk about sort of 2 increases to $5 million from 3.7 to 5 and 4.3 to 5 in elementary and secondary offices and additional centralized school support. What exactly is that extra 1.3 million and 0.7 million? Is that those 2 new positions?
That's part of it. It's a variety of investments across, so you'll see there are some offices named at the bottom here. So the part of it is additional investment and support in alternative education. There are a couple of targeted investments in alternative education we're making, and that's a part of the elementary and secondary offices. And then in the bottom half around additional centralized school support, there's just some smaller additional investments in there's like additional costs of extended learning time and turnaround and some other things going on there. They're not, the most major initiative is the 2 academic superintendents.
And within the Office of Turnaround, there is an investment of about $750,000 that will go to support those 10 schools that are writing plans in conjunction with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. The DESE funds the collaborative planning process, so there are school teams at each of those schools that have been stipended to create the plan. They do not, however, provide funds for implementation of those plans. And so we're making an investment so that the research-based strategies that the schools are identifying will be able to fund.
So Mary, are you talking about external individuals or folks that work at the school that are being charged to write these
Oh, no,
plans?
it's the school leader and a team of teachers, some of whom are chosen by the school leaders and some of whom are chosen by the BTU membership.
So they get a stipend on top of their salary to
The
do this extra
BTU
work?
members do, the school leader does not.
Okay, and that works out to about $75,000 per school.
Actually, the stipend money comes from the Department of
From DESE.
Elementary provides that. They don't provide any funding for instance, if the school is saying, we're looking at our ELA scores, we really need, some reading intervention. We need to train our teachers in a particular way of teaching phonics. DESE doesn't provide funding for that, so the $750,000 will be allocated across the schools so that we can do additional professional development for teachers, or they can buy materials to support the work that they have identified in the plans.
So it's not broken down, 10 schools, 75 each. Some may require more money, some may require less money.
Yeah, it'll be mainly based on the size of the school. Part of it, for additional professional development, we look at the teacher count so that we're able to compensate the teachers in the school. For the rest of it, it'll be based on the number of students in the school.
Okay. And you talk about,
You didn't,
is my time up? Is
yeah.
that what I'm
sorry.
getting assigned?
It was on low.
Oh, I didn't hear it. I apologize. I'll get back to the next round. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry.
I thought I was.
You're okay. Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. Can somebody give me an update on where we are with advanced work? I know a year or two ago there was talks of maybe make some changes in that program. Can we get an update on where we are with it now?
So we haven't really made any changes to the advanced work program. What we have done is create an additional initiative, which we call Excellence for All, which is being piloted now in 16 schools. And it is looking at what are the types of enrichment activities and professional development supports for teachers that would allow those classrooms to deliver the same kind of experience as an advanced work class experience without doing the sorting of students based on test scores. So instead of having a classroom just for students that have tested in, which is what an AWC class is, the Excellence for All is looking to do that for all the students in the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade classrooms in those schools. This is the 3rd year of that initiative, and the team that's been working on it is involved in a research study that will then allow us to determine which attributes of that program we can begin to expand more broadly across all of the 4th, 5th, and 6th grade classrooms in the district. There's no plans to make any changes to advanced work until the point at which we're able to say we have something else that will replace it that is delivering similar results.
So we haven't really seen any results for the Excellence for All yet? We're waiting on those results?
The team is involved in a research study. I myself have not seen the results yet.
Okay, so Excellence for All is in schools that don't have advanced work, is that correct?
It is in schools. There are the Bates, the Curley, the Edison are Excellence for All schools that were previously advanced work schools, where the families and staff in the schools asked to transition to Excellence for All because they wanted that experience for all students in the grade. The others are schools that were chosen specifically to represent the demographics of the district, particularly students of color, students with disabilities, and English learners. So, and then this year we added middle schools because this was the first year it rolled into 6th grade. So in the schools that were K to 5, we extended the program into the middle schools where those students were moving to.
So we will have some sort of barometer where we are at the end of this school year, you think, or beginning of next school year? Or?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Councilor Baker, do you?
Yeah, I think that at one of our previous hearings, Dr. Rose said that perhaps this summer the report on EFA would be available.
Okay.
And that would influence the transition to more schools for the following couple of school years.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. On page 19, it says increase in number of students who graduate with industry-related credentials and skills. Can you talk about that? Is that, where are we pairing these kids with? Like, what schools have this available to them, and what are the results?
Certainly. So if you take a look at the slide that we showed you that has all of the list of programs, all of those programs provide students with the opportunity to credential. So by that, we mean that there's some type of industry license or certification that the students can earn before they exit that pathway. So most of those licenses and credentials are what adults would earn out in the real world.
Yep.
And I had reported before that for our most recent data, which is the class of 2017, we had a 92.5% credentialing rate, and we continue to work on that and move up the needle towards 100%.
And that's the list on page 20 there. So everything you see here, it's a credentialed course that you come out of, and connecting on to a job there with these courses?
That's the work-based learning component, so that we're connecting students while they're in the pathway with job shadows and internship experiences so that they get to begin to connect their technical learning and their career readiness learning to the real world and to begin to do some authentic work.
And is that also happening at all of these schools here?
It is.
Okay. So what, you talked, I believe it was you, and I'm not sure what your name is, I apologize. You talked about a new program at Madison Park and said we'll need 500 more seats for that. Did I hear that right, or was?
Yep, that was me. I
okay.
said in total with the new programs that we have opened last year as well as this year across the district, we're adding about an additional 500 seats in career and technical education. But that would be across all of those schools that you see on the pathways
So
slide.
that wasn't just Madison Park?
No, no.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor Siomo, and thank you guys for the presentation, and a lot of good stuff in here, including the MyCap Naviance investment, which is really great. I just, some quick questions. Can you remind me the 10 schools that are working with DESE right now? Which schools are those?
So the Ellis is one that we are actually writing a full 3-year turnaround plan. And then the other 9 are, and I'm probably going to remember 8 and forget the 9th because that always happens, the Frederick, the Timilty, the Edwards, the Irving, the Higginson Lewis, the Umana, the sorry, thought I could do it right off the top of my head. The Sarah Greenwood, Mission Hill,
Okay.
and the King.
Thank you. And interested, I mean, I brought this up in previous hearings, this idea that we're obviously transitioning our system to a K through 6 to 12 system, or a K through 8 to 12 system. And we have obviously some standalone middle schools, including the Timilty where I went, that are obviously going through this rigorous process of planning. At what point do we say to this community, not just of teachers, parents, staff, students, families, surrounding community, that we're going to have to at some point make adjustments to align with the new vision of the district to cut down on transitions for families? At what point do we start making those transitions? And because as we obviously are working on plans, pouring more money into some of these middle schools, you know, of course there are students there and we have to do something, but at some point the long-term plan is to shift. How do we justify short-term investments with the long-term planning? How do you strike that balance? What does that look like?
So I think it is exactly as you mentioned, that there are students who are in those schools now who deserve the absolute best and deserve access to rigorous standards-based education. And so the work of the plan, it is just a 1-year plan that the department asks these schools to write. And so the plan is for the students who will be there next year. At the same time, we do know that having shared, you know, with the city that the plan is to transition these middle schools, there's an urgency in being able to describe the order of operations in, you know, what's the timeline in which each of these will transition. We started with the McCormick with a timeline of about a 1.5 to 2 years before the transition was to begin, and then an additional 2 years before they're actually back in the building. And so we also know that the ability to transition each middle school depends somewhat on swing space and available space to move students. And so it's a little bit like that game Rush Hour, where we need the first move, which will be once we know which high school is partnering with the McCormick, that will allow us to then begin to sequence the other schools. We also
I'm just going to, because for time's sake, I'm excited about what's happening in the McCormick. And I know, Mary, you've been following the conversation related to the Grove Hall Alliance. you know, you have the King and the Frederick in this list of 10 schools. You have school communities that have been talking for years now about the Grove Hall Alliance and what we're going to do to network those schools in that area, which is predominantly a community of color. And I'm really frustrated by, and this is not directed at you, the system as a whole, at how long it takes to have the necessary conversations to make some of those transitions. I think what's exciting about the McCormick and those conversations, you have engagement happening, you got the teachers union, you got all the right stakeholders at the table, and part of that is because the district is creating that space, which doesn't seem to exist for, say, the Grove Hall Alliance. And I get we have students at the King and the Frederick, so we have to do what we can, but those students, regardless of the resources we pour in, aren't going to be able to get what they need and to have the best and excellent experience in BPS if either the declining enrollment, folks are moving to other schools, or on the horizon, we have a long-term plan to transition these schools and to do something with them. So I'm really concerned by the sort of waiting timeline. I get we have to make sure that we do it right and that there are always unintended consequences, but you see movement over here with the McCormick. You don't see necessarily movement over here. People start asking questions or make that mean that we care less about communities of color or certain constituencies. Mm-hmm. And that bothers me as a district counselor representing largely a district of color. And given the fact that Grove Hall Alliance, what I love about it, and they can always do better in terms of engagement, they need help with that. These are schools run predominantly by people of color, women of color, doing really great work. There is a pipeline from K0 to the 12th grade in that area. You have the Haynes, which is an excellent school. Majority of the kids who live in that community can't even get in. We're waiting for data on enrollment patterns, all of that. So for me, I think the sense of where is the sense of urgency to start to roll out a similar sort of response plan, roll our sleeves up, make some really tough decisions to do something there. McCormick was slated to close. The reason it's not anymore is people obviously mobilized. In some communities, that doesn't necessarily happen. It doesn't mean those families don't care, of course. So I look at these 10 schools and I see many of them are the standalone middle schools that we ultimately want to do something about. But I have real concerns about pouring more and more money into these schools if we know at some point we have to do something drastic in order for those families and those students to get what they need to be successful. And this isn't sort of an attack at you guys. It's just naming it based on what I see, what I hear from the families in my district. And my time is totally up. I will wait to the next round.
In response, I will say that we did meet with the Grove Hall school leaders right before vacation to begin to sort of open up the conversation about that set of schools, particularly not just around the enrollment patterns, but around school improvement efforts. They're doing some partnership work with Mass Insight, so we want to be sure we're coordinating the plans that schools like the Frederick and the King have to write for DESE and the Mass Insight support that's going to happen for the other schools. But we did identify the potential feeder pattern from Haynes into Trotter and King as the first step in exploring how we could reconfigure that part of the city, and with sort of the determination of whether the Frederick makes most sense to be a K6 or a 712 as a conversation that will then, be part of that engagement. So the Grove Hall Alliance is one of the next places that we're going and beginning those conversations. We know also now with shifts in enrollment in East Boston that there's sort of an opening we didn't think was there around potentially opening up 7th and 8th grade seats in East Boston High School. And so again, that's a conversation that we're beginning to figure out. How can we mobilize around that in a way that allows us to do it with the same degree of engagement, stakeholder engagement that we've done the McCormick conversation on.
No, and I absolutely agree, and was with Counselor Edwards at some of her schools in Eastie, and I think it's exciting. They're ready to move. The same thing with the Alliance. Mm-hmm. And I'd love to see the same response from the district as we see with the McCormick exist for the Alliance schools. They have been asking since for over 2 years, build BPS, reconfiguration, before we even had any proposals out in the public space. How can we work with you, given that information, to come up with a plan? They don't want to work separate and apart from the district. A lot of rumors out there. That's not their plan. They're like, how can we come together in a community of color as a community of color of schools and reshape and redefine what schools of color that are led by people of color can look like. But they need the support of the district in having those conversations. And it's been slow to move. And even the meeting you're referencing, I didn't know about until after the fact. And so I really think there's an opportunity here as we look at the McCormick and as we look at what's happening in East Boston and this idea of networking schools in particular neighborhoods to create options for families right in their backyard, I think is a really good thing, particularly when you look at high schools and all the conversations we're having about high schools that may be working, may not be working. Here you have an opportunity to reshape, redesign for a community to make some schools excellent for the folks in that community so that they don't have to leave their community to go elsewhere. So I'm excited for the possibilities. Thank you.
Councilor Zakem. Councilor Wu. I'm sorry. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for your presentation today. Can we talk a little bit, I'm on slide 19, you don't have to flip there. I just want to talk a little bit about the differences in CTE funding versus CVTE funding and Chapter 74 versus non-Chapter 74 funding.
Yeah, so Michelle can speak to CVTE versus CTE, but in general, Chapter 74 is sort of applied two ways. Its main purpose is to certify programs as meeting a certain state standard. Under that, we then report to the state how many students we have in vocational programs under this standard, and that's a part of our Chapter 70 formula funding. So in terms of the general fund, Chapter 74 influences how much money we get through Chapter 70. Unfortunately for us, in the current formula, because we get minimum state aid, additional students in Chapter 74 certified programs does not lead to additional Chapter 70 funding. However, it could potentially impact our allocation of Perkins, which is a federal grant that comes through the state. We have seen relatively stable funding there. Michelle can speak to that in more detail, but the scope of that funding is significantly more limited versus Chapter 70. It's just in the current formula, when we get an increased sort of foundation budget, it doesn't increase our state aid, unfortunately.
Yep, I can speak to the Perkins funding, and as David mentioned, in October we report our students as Chapter 74 or non-Chapter 74 to the state through the SIMS enrollment process. And both of those pathway types are considered career and technical education, and they qualify for Perkins funding under the federal guidelines. So and we had talked about this before at the Madison Park hearing as well, that in the spring, the teachers across the district do budget presentations with my office. We collect all of those budget proposals and put together a district budget in the summer of each year. And so we had also presented that Madison Park had been allocated in the most recent fiscal year for approximately $620,000 in equipment funding through the Perkins grant, and probably about another $100,000 through contractual services and supports. To compare that to all the other programs in the district, probably had about $230,000 in funding across those 20 programs. So almost a third of what we allocated to Madison Park for their equipment and accompanying resources.
I'm just taking my notes. Thank you for that. So what I'm trying to understand, so The Chapter 74 versus the non-Chapter 74, what is the difference between those two?
There is actually very little difference. They both correspond to the same set of state and federal regulations under Perkins guidelines. One of the main differences is that the Chapter 74 programs have to go through a fairly rigorous state approval process. There's a facilities and equipment component to that with a site review, as well as a programmatic review and an application. The non-Chapter 74 programs just go through a district approval process. We use the same criteria. The one difference is that the non-Chapter 74 programs do not have an official admissions policy. We do work with the schools around what the selection criteria is for students to enter those non-Chapter 74 programs, but there is not an official approved admissions policy to enter. Otherwise, pretty much all of the standards and requirements are the same for Chapter 74 as non-Chapter 74.
So within Madison Park, for example, which has Chapter 74 programs, there isn't an admissions policy to the school, but there is one to the individual programs within the school?
Well, there is a process, so I wouldn't call it an admissions policy, but there is a school-adopted process for how students get and select into those programs. So yes, that does exist. After the students go through exploratory, then they enter that process.
Is there any analysis of non-Chapter 74 programs or Chapter 74 programs that happen in schools that aren't Madison Park? Is there any analysis around student desire or attractiveness to our kids that we would then look to replicate those programs at Madison? And I ask that question because there's a lot of tension between the Madison community and supporters of Madison and non-Madison schools that have these programs. There's a feeling that other schools in the district are and I think that some of these programs should exist in other schools, but there is some tension created between these school communities. Madison feels that it should be the place where this happens, and that would help attract more students, create better partnerships, and all of that.
One of the important things to understand is that for the most part, those non-Chapter 74 programs begin in with the upperclassmen. So we are not seeing student selection into the high school based on the fact that that high school has that program. It's recruitment that is done in grade 9 and grade 10. Many of the programs begin in grade 11. So that's one of the other main differences. Chapter 74 programs begin in grade 9 with an exploratory, and then the students are in the program for 4 years. You probably also noticed with the slide that we showed with all of the programs for FY20 that the new programming, we've been very careful and kind of considerate around the new programming, and none of that overlaps with the programming that Madison Park has. So as an example, we opened fashion technology at Boston Arts Academy. I think everybody would agree that makes a lot of sense given their mission and vision. Environmental science at Boston Green Academy. Again, it matches with their mission and vision of the school. We have an engineering program at the O'Brien. So we've been very careful around opening new STEM programs that do not overlap with Madison Park's current programs. It does not mean at some point in the future there would not be a program opened that Madison Park does have, but that has not been our focus in the last couple of years.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Councilor Wu?
Thank you and good morning. I just have one question around my question that I ask year after year based on feedback from many school leaders, but just the nature of how unpredictable the process feels year to year, the timelines, the matching all the numbers to when they get the budgets and then the adjustments and this and that. When will the district move to a multi-year budgeting situation?
For schools?
For schools.
We are doing our best to smooth out the process. as much as we can. At the moment, we have no plans to move to a multi-year budgeting process because of the limitations of the way our funding works. It's hard for us to make multi-year commitments. But what we are doing is trying to create processes that limit the amount of variability that you would have year to year. So what I would say is we're hopeful that we're able to move schools to a multi-year planning process where they're able to make school design decisions and other sort of big decisions that impact the budget with the faith that the budget that there'll be enough flexibility to be able to have them continue their program design. I think the challenge is any schools that see significant changes in enrollment from year to year, it's always going to be hard for us to maintain a previous plan in that circumstance.
Do you anticipate any major changes in the way that this kind of stabilization or added flexibility might happen?
Just gonna, the front table got a little crowded, but if you don't mind, I'd love to join into David's response. Counselor, I just wanted to add that we are proudly in our 3rd consecutive year where all of our weights in how we fund schools have either been stable or gone up. And I just wanted to state for the record that our intention is to continue with that trajectory. When David talks about wanting to have multi-year planning, even if we can't have a multi-year budget, I will say to every school leader, our intention is that our weights stay the same or go up, barring huge unforeseen changes. If we're in a recession, if federal funding falls off a cliff, things that are those kind of external shocks. So that's what it means to us to give the signals of stability that we can where we can. Major shifts in demographics are a challenge that we're trying to figure out how to navigate. Because while enrollment is going down in almost every neighborhood in most program areas, we have need rising elsewhere, like in our serving students with autism and some of our special education programs. So that is a very real thing that we're grappling with. I don't know if that answered some of your questions, and I'd stay for more follow-up.
So in terms of I have a little time left. In terms of even the weight staying the same or going up, are you, is it a period of time that you're able to say that for, or I mean,
Yep.
it feels like a lot of it is still, use the word have faith and kind of hope, and
Yep.
but it'd be nice to have just some predictability.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I would say to you or to any of our school leaders, our plan is indefinitely to have weights be the same or go up, barring unforeseen financial challenges for the district, such as those that I mentioned. We feel like at this point, we want our schools to have more, not have less. And what we're trying to do as we make adjustments to the funding is to make sure our highest need students are having more differentiation and our schools with the highest concentrations are having more differentiation. So that's our goal as of now. I don't want to make that there's no circumstance in which I can imagine that changing right now as I sit here, but it's hard to predict the future. Yeah. I would also say that we have really tried to improve one of the biggest pain point for school leaders, which was the enrollment projections process. I hope that as you're talking to school leaders and teachers that you're hearing that people feel like it is more transparent, earlier, and with a lot more data and feedback. And we've had good response from school leaders, and that is the anchor point that school budgets come off of. So we've really tried to improve what was, I know, a real pain point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize, I had to step out for another meeting, so if you've gone over this, just let me know. But can you talk a little bit about sort of AP classes offered to students, and are they at just sort of the overall with the are they in every high school? How many? Are we growing that program?
Yes, so we do have advanced placement courses offered across 27 of our high schools, so it's not at every single high school, nor does it necessarily need to be based on the high school's vision.
How many high schools do we have total?
35.
Okay.
Currently, in the 11th and the 12th grade, we have about 33% of our students accessing advanced placement. Where we do have some concern, and this is where we would need to be a little bit more strategic in re-envisioning our AP program, is that 19% of those students who are accessing AP are at our non-exam schools, and 85% are at our exam schools. Across all of those AP serving schools, there are 239 unique courses, with 178 of those courses at our non-exam schools and 61 courses at our exam schools. Through our budget, we do offer subsidies.
I'm sorry, 178 are at the non-exam schools and 61 are at the exam
Yes.
schools, even though exam schools make up 84% of those enrolled?
Yes.
Explain that
So
to me.
the courses,
That seems counterintuitive.
yeah, the courses could be under-enrolled at our non-exam schools,
Or could it be also multiple sections?
or offer multiple sections.
Walk me through that a little bit more. I just don't, that seems completely counterintuitive.
So according to the data that I have in front of me, there are 239 courses offered total in advanced placement, 178 at our non-exam schools and 61 at our exam schools. The courses could be under-enrolled at our non-exam schools, leading to higher enrollment in our exam school AP offering courses. But I could also get, I know it sounds a little.
The exam schools would more likely have fuller or close to full government AP classes, but it seems that's a huge difference that there's 117 more or different AP classes that are offered at the non-exam schools for a significantly smaller pool of.
Yes, and I can get some more drill down data for you to kind of make sense of it all for all of us, actually.
Yeah. Do we?
Maybe perhaps I can help.
Please.
So you're looking at three exam schools, so 85% of the student population within those 3 exam schools. While it's a smaller number of courses offered, you're only talking about 3 schools versus the number of courses offered across 32 other schools. So 19% of the total enrollment of 32 schools could in fact be more students enrolled, but a smaller percentage because you're talking about a far broader array of schools. So there's a higher concentration enrolled in AP courses in our exam schools.
Yeah.
That's what's represented there by 85%. There's a smaller concentration of students, but there are a larger amount of classes offered because there are a far broader array of schools.
Okay, I think I'm following it. I guess when you say there are 178 classes, is that 178 different type of AP classes?
So if you have like English language composition, and you have 2 of those courses at a school, so that would be 2 unique courses.
Gotcha, even though it's the same class, the same AP exam, the same curriculum.
And when I say,
understand.
yes, and when I say under-enrolled, you know, I'm saying it could be a situation where we have 18 students in an AP class versus 25. And 18 is a suitable number to invest in a student accessing a more rigorous course, but you will get more full enrollment at an exam school.
Understood. Okay, so I guess I was misinterpreting the. How many different AP classes do we offer?
You mean different, like, content?
Correct.
So I would need to get you the information on that.
Nobody knows? I mean, that seems to me that we should know
Well,
that.
we do have we know that we have the 8 traditional AP courses that are recommended nationally, like AP Bio, Calculus, English Lang, English Lit.
Yeah.
We also have some unique, you know, STEM-related courses that I would want to make sure I give you the accurate
Okay,
data
if I could get
on
that information.
Absolutely.
And then just briefly, finally, if a student is at a school, a high school that does not offer an advanced placement course, can he or she take it either online or to have access to it?
There are some schools that collaborate together, such as the case with the Henderson and Tech Boston, where a student is able to access the course or the exam through Tech Boston. There are also some schools who, within their vision, are more aligned with dual enrollment rather than advanced placement. And that is the case at schools like Fenway High School.
What does that mean? If a student is at Fenway High School, he or she can take the AP class elsewhere if it's not offered?
So Fenway High School does have an AP Spanish course.
Yeah.
Their students can also access an AP online course if they choose to. However,
For which subject?
For one of the 8
Yeah, okay.
subjects.
Good. I guess that's my closing point is I really think that we need to have a policy in place that if a student is enrolled at a school that does not offer an advanced placement option and he or she is able to do it, we need to make sure that that student has an opportunity to enroll. I understand not having them offered at every school, but we should have access at every school. That should absolutely be a paramount concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Sabi George.
Thank you. Councilor O'Malley, just to follow up on his point through the chair, it sounds like the need for a cooperative agreement similar to athletic programming that schools can partner. I would just put a sort of a fine point on Councilor O'Malley's request for the number of AP courses that are offered in the district. If we could have the number of courses that are offered, the unique courses, their titles, but then also if our students are accessing any of them only online, because I know we offer some credit recovery and some other programs simply online. That would be, I think, an interesting point to realize and understand the success those students are having if they're only accessing it online. And then if we have students that are showing an interest in any of our school communities, in particular curriculum, in particular AP classes, how are we responding as a district to offering it, training teachers, make sure that we have appropriately trained teachers to offer that course in the school community? How do we do that? How do we respond to student demand?
So we use PSAT data, which is a test that is taken at the 10th and 11th grade through the College Board and administered to all of our students at the 10th and 11th grade across the district. And we use that data to determine advanced placement potential. And then we work with our schools strategically with the College Board as well as Mass Insight to identify if there is a teacher within that school to teach a course that students have potential to be successful in. And through those two partnerships, we offer the Advanced Placement Summer Institute, which is a 1 to 2 week workshop that teachers will be able to access to be credentialed to teach the AP course in that particular area.
And then are we also following, one of the greatest challenges that I think we find with specialized programs in any of our schools, whether it's AP, whether it's CTE, any sort of specialized program, is the teacher often is the one with the specialty, and if they leave because we've got staffing changes, budget changes, they leave for a different opportunity, that program goes away even though the student desire is still there. What methods or what practices in place to encourage longevity of program in our school communities?
Yeah, in addition to supporting with building the skill of AP teachers, we're also really focused in collaboration with Mass Insight on the pre-AP. So we're looking at working with teachers in that 9th and 10th grade space to get them ready to actually take on an AP course. There is the reality that once a teacher does leave, there may be a gap in a year and when that school is able to rebuild their capacity to offer that course again, especially if there is a critical number of students at that school with potential. So, and we look at potential as being 15 or more students at the school in order to really put the resources towards trying to sustain a teacher to teach that course.
So that is related to a question I had around CVT and CTE programs. Do we have sort of that bench strength when we think about professional development for teachers and teacher certification in all of our schools, whether it's AP, vocational ed, CTE, that programs can continue with the retirement of a teacher or the departure of an educator for whatever reason? This is for anyone and everyone.
Yes, I think that headmasters are certainly being strategic around building capacity outside of the main or lead teacher for a program. There are integration efforts underway with academics and vocational teachers, as an example, at Madison Park. The latest computer science teacher actually came from the math department. So there are different ways that we're trying to build up that capacity, because we certainly would not want for a program to decline because a teacher has left.
Right. I would hope that that's a part, and one of the challenges we have in the district is that school leaders are changing often too, so that strategic visioning, if it's not part of the school culture, if it's not part of what the school community is regularly engaged in, it all falls apart with the departure of especially a stronger school leader. Earlier, you had mentioned the term wall-to-wall for some of the CT. Can you just describe that? I might have missed part of the sentence or something.
Sure. Yeah. So when we had shown the slide again with the Perkins programs, I had mentioned that at East Boston High School, we have a model where in the junior year, all students will go into a pathway. So we call that our wall-to-wall model. So students are in a 2-year program, junior and senior year. East Boston High School is semester-based, so they'll take 1 semester course each year.
Great. And then on page 21, it's noted here the out-of-district student tuition, $896,000. Where is that money going and why?
Sure. So we currently have a total of 34 students at Norfolk Aggie. This year for FY19, we've paid approximately $750,000 in tuition to Norfolk Aggie. We do have 2 additional students. One is at Essex Tech and one is at Keefe Tech. Those students are upperclassmen, so they will be graduating and kind of cycling out of that tuition within the next year. The majority of the students who are applying to us, I believe we had 23 applications this year. All of them were for Norfolk Aggie, except for one, which was for Blue Hills Culinary Arts program, which we denied because we have an in-district Chapter 74 program in culinary arts at Madison Park. So we're seeing consistent demand for Norfolk Aggie and the agricultural programs that they offer. This includes animal science, horticulture, agricultural mechanics, and we do have a couple of students who are upperclassmen in environmental science and technology at Norfolk Aggie, but we denied the most recent environmental science applications because we now have our Chapter 74 program at Boston Green Academy.
So tell me why we haven't brought animal science to Boston. I think that industry, we see it in our work, that industry is booming. And I went out last year to Worcester Tech to look at their VOC program, and they have a really great partnership with whoever the local veterinary hospital is out there. I know that Nashua Tech has the MSPCA involved out there. I mean, that just seems like such an opportunity for us here in Boston that we haven't capitalized on.
It certainly is a possibility. As you know, it's very specialized programming, specialized spaces and equipment that would be needed in partnerships. So it is a longer term type of planning process that we would need to engage in compared to, as an example, opening a computer science pathway. But it's certainly a possibility.
Well, it's appreciated that you recognize the specialized space. I would like to understand better, and this maybe is for David, at our Madison hearing, the reference to Madison's role in Build BPS and some of the, I think, very specialized needs that vocational technical education requires. And if you're thinking about specialized programs like animal science, what would be the investment needed? I guess I have two questions, and I heard the timer go off, so indulge me for a moment, please, Chairman. What would be the investment needed to bring a program like animal science or any other program? What is that initial investment when we think about infrastructure and at Madison for a new program? And what's different about how we fund improvements, physical plant improvements to a vocational technical ed school like Madison?
Well, I'll take the first part of that question. It's hard to put a dollar value on that because in the example that I just gave with computer science, we're just opening another computer lab. So the investment in facilities and equipment is actually fairly minimal. When you get into specialized programs, as an example, the newest application that Madison is attempting to put forward is for HVAC. Considerable equipment, electrical work, HVAC work on the space, and so we can be in hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of, improvements to the facility.
So how much is HVAC going to cost us?
We can certainly get you that number. I know they're in the application process right now, and that's part of the application.
Will HVAC be available for next school year?
Well, again, they're in the application process, but it will need to go through the DESE approval process. So it's hard to say whether it will be approved for next year.
So it won't be in September?
There is a possibility, but it still needs to go through an approval process. Yeah.
I don't know if Dave has
Yeah,
follow-up.
in terms of, the Madison Park, I would say you split the cost into two or three different funding sources. One is capital projects, right? For example, recently we did about $1.6 million of work on their welding shop to provide upgrades there. And so I think within capital, there are actually then two different kinds of projects as well, right? One are sort of the types of projects you would see in any school, right, that aren't particularly Madison Park specific, but all schools need, roofs, windows, all that sort of thing, boilers. And there is some of that in the future for Madison Park that was laid out in the hearing. And then in terms of vocational specific things, we do have the ability to use some Perkins funding for some of the equipment needs that we have in the school. And then also, would any other additional programming, we would have to look at additional costs as with any other investment in the district.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for
Thanks.
that.
Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on, make sure I got my numbers right. Did you say we have 242 students at Norfolk Aggie?
No, 30.
No, I don't. Yeah.
34 students. Okay, I was going to
I
say.
hope I didn't say that.
Makes more sense. My math worked. That worked out to about 3,000 a pupil. Okay,
No.
so 34. And what are the grades?
They're across grades 9 through 12.
Okay, and how many applied? How many current 8th graders applied for the waiver for next year?
Yep, keep in mind that the students who apply are not all from Boston Public Schools. They can be just Boston residents.
Yep.
We had 23 applications, and as I
Wow.
mentioned before, one was to Blue Hills, and the rest were to Norfolk Aggie.
Okay, and how many? Those are 23 from BPS or 23 from the city of Boston?
City of Boston,
Okay, can you get us the information on how many are current BPS enrolled students?
certainly.
And then similarly, how many of the 34 students who are currently actually the 34 at Norfolk, 2 at Essex and 1 at Keefe, how many were in the BPS in the 6th,
When they
8th
applied.
grade? Yeah.
Yep.
And then Norfolk Aggie, it works out to about 30, let me see. Make sure I have my math right. If it's $22,000 per pupil sort of tuition, is that right? So then I would assume the other $150,000 approximately would be the 2 Essex Tech and 1 Keefe. So simple math is about 50 a student. Why is it so much more expensive to send a student to Essex Tech or Keefe Tech as opposed to Norfolk Aggie?
That's not accurate. What you're seeing is the budget. We're not actually using all, or won't be using all of that budget this year.
I
So, yep. So actually, to send the students to Keefe, it's about $9,000 per student in tuition this year. And Essex Tech is about 15,000.
And what is Norfolk?
Norfolk is low 20s, as you mentioned, yeah.
22,000. Okay. All right, and what would it cost to be able to offer the programs that are offered at Norfolk Aggie in a Boston Public High School?
We certainly would have to do some research.
Yeah.
I don't have that, information with me today, but we would have to first convene an advisory committee of individuals who are working in those specific fields. We would want to conduct some site visits to exemplar programs in the area, and then we could, begin to put together a budget around the needed equipment and facilities.
Yeah. I really appreciated Superintendent Johnson, who made a real effort, and I know some of you worked with her to make sure that we did everything possible to minimize the out-of-district placements as it related to children with special needs and needing specialized services, make sure we could do it internally. And I think that we have this conversation every year, and I understand that it would be, there would be some cost associated with it, but it seems to me that an investment could be made as we talk about build BPS, as we talk about a new facilities plan, as we talk about restructuring of some of the grades, that this is the time to really be able to be a little more inventive in our program offering, and then we can get to a point where we get that 34 or 22 or 23 number down to zero. I know there's a cost associated with it. I know it's not as easy as hiring one extra person at Fenway High to be able to deal with some of these things, but it's just frustrating to me that, and no offense to anyone in this room, you're all good people doing good jobs, but I feel as though the bureaucracy of BPS continues to grow year after year, yet we have an opportunity to maybe do something a little innovative as it relates to course offerings for our kids, and I don't want to see that opportunity missed. So I don't have a question as much as a comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilor Savi-George.
Thank you. I do, this I think is related to vocational ed, but also talks a lot about alternative ed opportunities and adult ed in particular. A lot of the other voc tech programs in the state utilize the space after hours and engage, whether it's the trades for training or adult ed programs for training. So have we thought as a district at all about how we open up our school facilities in general, but in particular Madison Park, to 16-hour-a-day programming? Michelle.
Yes, and thank you for asking that question. We just had a meeting within the last couple of weeks with Executive Director Kevin McCaskill and Neil Sullivan from the PIC. We are submitting an application to the Department of Education related to expanding access after school for Chapter 74 carpentry programming. So actually I'll be submitting that application today. It's a planning grant, and the planning would take place across this summer with the expectation that the successful plan would be implemented at some point next year. We are looking to pilot a small program in semester 2 of next school year. And so that would be after-school programming in carpentry with access to kind of the building trades and construction exposure for a small group of students as our first foray into this after-school space.
And then what about adult ed?
Yeah, well, and I just wanted to add on a little bit. This part of the Network 9 getting together, this is the network of all the alternative schools and programs actually being at the same table and looking at the issues that are facing our students for the first time together at the same time. It became very obvious that access to dual enrollment options, access to CT, like deliberate pathways that you see designed in other schools that are larger and can, quite frankly, afford these type of options, we're missing from that network of schools. So throughout the last several months, it's really been pushed to the forefront. It's one of the main subcommittees of the working group, the high school working group that focuses specifically on alternative education design. In addition to the Madison Park planning grant that Michelle had mentioned, there's couple other conversations that we're looking at with some of the institutions in Boston, just exploring how we can provide access to all students, knowing that alternative education being smaller and more customized hasn't really been a strategic effort to make it open for everybody. So it's a hot topic right now in this group that we're digging into throughout this month.
Great, that's excellent to hear. What about others accessing our buildings? So, for example, I was at the Gardner the other day in Councilor Siomo's district, and they do a lot of after-hours programming that is loosely related to the students who attend that school, but it's community-based organizations that are using those spaces. And when schools close at 2, or our high schools in particular that close at 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon, they're ghost towns afterwards. How do we activate that space and create additional resources for adults to become engaged in that building? And I think when adults become more engaged in our schools, they're more interested in sending their kids to those schools.
Yeah, I'll just say one piece about how this relates to alternative education before I turn it over about our community schools, is which I think you're getting at. Several of our alternative spaces are very small, and with the expansion of the number of students who hit this kind of 22 to 30-year-old demographic, which really wasn't really a huge percentage of who's being served in alternative, but upon recently, they just recently went over 25% of their student population is that demographic. So we're looking at how we can keep our schools open longer, and a lot of our alternative schools end by 2:30 or 3 o'clock. Just had a conversation at BATA about how we could keep the doors open and have an evening session, kind of like an extension, a formal partnership with adult school. And our adult school campus technically is in the middle of Madison Park. They have a space issue. It's not, they have very high demand. But if we're able to create a formal satellite with a school that specializes in students that are aging out, it basically brings opportunity to the adult school world. It bridges the transition of our older students into adult school. So definitely is part of the conversation. We should see something coming up very, very soon. But to your question with the Gardner and some of the other schools, I think we're looking at the community schools grant that I know Mary has.
Yeah, actually, GPA is one of our hub schools, and so the model is very much to engage not just students, but families and other community members after school. We just submitted a federal grant that would allow the Gardner and the Burke, which is another premier hub school currently, to mentor additional schools to adopt that model. So if the grant is funded, I think it calls for somewhere between 4 and 6 additional hub school models to be kind of incubated with the support of GPA and the Burke.
Great. And then you mentioned, Tommy, you mentioned the age 22 students. Earlier this year, I filed a hearing order to make sure that we're really providing the resources for anyone who's about to turn age 22, instead of dismissing them from school, allowing them, and I appreciate the extension that the superintendent and the school committee approved to allow students to finish the school year with some sort of appeal process. We talk a little bit about the numbers of students we're talking about in a given school year.
Yeah, so we presented the school committee on January 16th and January 30th. We've been working to restructure the maximum age enrollment policy that was originally written in 1999. Just had a meeting with interim superintendent Perel on Thursday about this. We were joking that 22 is my new favorite number. She wants to make me a little jersey that has 22 on the back. But
we also need 22 nurses while we're at it.
This next, not tomorrow, but the next school committee meeting, I know we're talking about something else tomorrow. On May 8th, I will be making the final presentation of the policy revision. It's almost to the finish line here. I think it's going to be positively received by our school committee, and then it'll go into vote on May 22nd. I think that you will be happy with what's coming out of that, and as soon as I have it finalized, I'll send you a copy just so you can see. But yeah, it's been something it's on our mind, and just looking at how we can revise some of these policies that were written in the past to meet the needs of today's BPS is what we're really looking at here.
How many students are age 21?
Turning this year,
22.
We took a snapshot in January through June, because this is the population we're looking at from that hearing that we had at the Burke in October. The number was right around 100. It was roughly 1/3 of the students in non-diploma bound seats. These are students like at the Carter, school. There was 1/3 of the students, and then two-thirds, were all across the district, with 1/3 of those, half of those 2/3 being at the BATA. So BATA had 1/3 of the 21-year-old students. There was 1/3 sprinkled across in traditional schools all across the city, and then 1/3 were non-diploma bound students.
Can I
Yeah,
can
go
I ask
ahead,
one more?
Louise.
Is that
Yeah,
all right?
yeah, sure.
Thank you. So earlier this year, I met with Bottom Line in response to some of the valedictorians project and some of those conversations that I think we've all been engaged in over the last few months. Can someone just share with me a little bit of the work that I think Naviance will help with this, but some of the work that we're looking, how do we support our guidance counselors, our students, especially our students preparing for graduation and for career? How are we keeping track of them after graduation? How are we keeping them engaged? How are we making sure that they're successful in life after BPS?
So one of the high school working groups will be focused, or is currently focused, on how do we build a stronger student support system, and how do we re-envision the role of the school counselors, particularly in the area of college and career planning, as we know we have a wealth of resources, Bottom Line, You Aspire, the PIC, and others here within the city of Boston. We want to really build a stronger post-secondary leadership team structure at our schools, where we're strategically engaging these partners, looking at data that Naviance and other systems will provide us to identify where the gaps in services are, where are our students as far as are they on track to graduation, and are they on track to access a post-secondary opportunity. So that work is definitely underway, and we value the contributions that all of our partner resources bring to the table, for sure.
How do we currently keep track of students after they graduate or leave the district, I suppose?
So one of the ways that we do that is the district does have a subscription with the National Student Clearinghouse, where we know exactly who end up entering college immediately following graduation, so the fall after their June graduation, and we're able to track them also 16 months out. In addition, we have a partnership with the Success Boston College Completion Initiative, and as you know, they provide transitional coaching supports to over 1,000 of our students who are entering local and state colleges. Bottom Line is one of 8 partner organizations providing those services to students. They really help us to look at trends analysis and see what's happening to our students, particularly in their early college years, so we can build up programs and services to help our students to better navigate the college during their early years, where we know a great number of our students are prone to stopping or dropping out. And I know Michelle, through her work, also does some tracking of students.
Yep, it's also required for the CTE students that we conduct what's called a one-year grad survey. So 1 year after graduation, we partner with the PIC and attempt to contact all of our CTE graduates to find out what they were doing at that time. So the survey includes whether they're enrolled in post-secondary education, if they're employed, if they're in the military, or none of the above, and then also whether their options are related to the trade that they studied in their CTE program.
And then what about non-CTE students that don't attend college, or we as a system thought they were attending college and September comes and they don't show up? How are we tracking or supporting those students? Are we?
And I think this comes back to, as Ms. Ennis-Mitchell was referencing, the superintendent has identified several priorities in secondary education where we have now collaborative working groups underway that are looking across not only our high schools but also beyond high school. So one of these areas that you're mentioning, Counselor, is within those working groups looking at graduation requirements across our schools, guidance counseling, as Ms. Ennis-Mitchell mentioned, adult education and alternative education, as you were hearing from Mr. Welch and Ms. Silveria, looking at CTE, taking up that very, very question. Some of the national research right now that has just come forward that's really kind of a primary basis for this suggests this. 88% of young people enter high school with big dreams, ready for that next step in life, expecting high school to provide that for them. 71% of young people across this country complete the expectations that high school has set out for them, yet just 17% are ready beyond graduation. That national study has labeled that the opportunity myth. While Boston Public Schools tends to be a leader in many ways in urban education, still far too many of our youngsters, as the superintendent has recognized and as you've recognized, are still very much part of that statistic. The local foundations then have sponsored some additional research, which was convened by Johns Hopkins University, Professor Belfance, who's a leading researcher in this field, who's identified then some specific areas or target points that then yield success for our young people upon graduation. Those target points have then led to the basis of these working groups that we are convening across the district. One particular is looking at what courses young people are participating in, so that not only are they getting the counseling support so that their life dreams are realized upon graduation, but they're also accessing those courses. So that work is very much underway, and we look forward to bringing back to you some of the data and some of the work that comes out of those working groups.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Before I close it out, I did want to kind of restate and ask from a previous hearing, because it came up here as well with enrollment. And David, maybe you can speak to this. Somebody threw out some numbers. So, for example, 55,000 BPS, 11,000 Metco, 10,000 Metco?
Yeah, so we're just waiting on our final data from the state about that, because we don't collect that directly. But so we could, I don't have, do you have that? We can pull it up. We have it. We can pull it up from last year.
So
it would be just a year old.
Right, and I kind of crunched those numbers that I took notes of, and it came out, I think, 71% BPS,
That's about right.
29.
Yeah.
And what I'd like the district, the department to do is kind of look at the historical data.
Okay.
Because I remember when I first got elected, that question was asked either by me or someone every single year,
Yeah.
like what's the, and I was really surprised to hear that going back to like the 60s and 70s, it was kind of always traditionally 75% of the student-age population, school-age children went to BPS and 25 went to other, whether
Right.
it's private, parochial, at the time, no charter.
Right.
And if we're looking at, like, if, I just want to know what that trend is, and if we're
Sure.
losing more of our school-age kids to private, parochial, or charter
Right.
now versus 5 years ago or more, then that's a troubling trend, because we are going to continue to
Right.
have less kids to pull from, because, you know,
Because of all the
reasons,
demographics we've said
the
before,
demographics and such. And then I would kind of want to look at where the kids are that are opting out of BPS, what
Yes.
neighborhoods, what zip codes. If that's attainable, I don't know.
And we do have some data on that, and we'll be happy to come back with a full package,
Right.
multi-year, for the things we can.
Right.
I do know one of the things we've looked at is the number of school-age children by neighborhood who attend BPS. And so we'll be able to give you a summary of that information.
And yeah, oh, go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you,
No,
sorry.
sorry.
I have some of the answers at my fingertips, some rough numbers going back to 1990. We have all of the data going back as into the 60s, so I just don't have it in front of me. But the major shifts have actually been between the charter and parochial sectors. So going back to 1990.
I don't need to go back that far.
100 years of enrollment.
According to DESE, we had approximately 15,000 students in parochial schools, and that number is down to close under 5,000, while charters have grown from basically non-existence in that period to almost 10,000. So that shift there has been most pronounced. We have seen some slight decline in BPS, but nothing as marked as that. At the same time, private school enrollment from 1990 is up slightly, but not remarkably, from something around 3,000 to up to 4,000. And NetGo has been mostly flat.
All right, okay.
Can I
Yeah,
add
sure,
to that
sure.
question? Because I think, we know that our student population is the 55,000, which is sort of a newer number for me. But I think at yesterday's hearing, someone referenced that over the course of a school year, we have 59 to 60,000
Right.
students, so 5 kids are
Right.
coming through our district at any point in time.
Yeah.
Do we ever look at those 5,000 kids, why we can't fully capture them? Because if we could ever get back up to 59 or 60,000, we'd be talking about a much different problem.
Well, there's not necessarily any one moment when we have 59 to 60,000
Right,
students.
right.
It's that we might have a student in a seat in September, and that seat is full in May. It just has a different student.
Right.
And so the 59 to 60,000 were the number of unique students who we supported over the course of the year.
Right, but I guess my understanding those kids, why are they
Right.
why is that number, where are those 5,000 kids? And I get that,
Yeah.
sort of the dynamic of that number, but it'd be really interesting to understand those kids, because it's
Yeah.
additional revenue for the school district, right?
Well, it's more efficient because then you're filling empty seats that are prevalent throughout the system.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I think we are also very interested in that data
Yeah.
and have been doing we have a lot of different sort of things in the works to try and help us figure out, from surveying families, working with schools when kids leave to make sure because we have sort of data on why kids have left, but only the data that the schools enter, because the school really knows.
Right.
And so we're working with schools to try and make sure that when a kid withdraws, we know why, right? And then I think what that'll allow us to do is target some of the individual populations. And so part of what we know is that our Build BPS initiative is part of our effort to do some of that we know some of the reasons that students leave is they start looking ahead towards the next transition coming up. Right. And even if they don't get a seat right away, if they get a call from a charter off a wait list, if they decide in the middle of the year to go to a parochial school,
Yeah, and are those 5,000 kids mostly in, say, a 4th or a 5th grade classroom that doesn't have a 6th grade?
Right.
Like, that would be really fascinating to know.
Yeah.
Or are they in a 7th grade, a 7th and 8th grade situation that's very weak?
Right.
And
so we're definitely in the step of data collection on that, because our data is very mixed right now about why kids are leaving, because it's really the practitioners on the ground who know, but they only know their sort of small sample, and so we have to get better data across the system to know that. And so we're working with individual schools to try and see if we can build some different cases of why.
I think some of the trend that I've seen over these years too is after 1st grade, there's a kind of a drop off. Kids leave the system, and then again in the 5th grade, for whatever reason. And I'm glad to hear that you're looking at that. Well, thank you all very much for today's testimony. The hearing regarding elementary and secondary school support as pertaining to the FY20 budget is adjourned.